Burkina Faso's young leader, Ibrahim Traoré, just delivered one of the most powerful speeches of our time. A speech that boldly exposed neo-colonial control, Western hypocrisy, and the urgent need for African unity. But while his words ignited hope across the continent, major news outlets stayed silent. Why? Because truth, when spoken without fear, becomes dangerous to those who profit from silence. In this video, we uncover the truth behind Ibrahim Traoré's latest speech, the message the media won't show you, and why it matters more than ever. In the heart of Africa, where red earth meets golden skies, a young soldier was quietly carving his path through silence and steel. Ibrahim Traoré's journey did not begin with loud declarations or international attention. No, it began with the quiet endurance of a man who watched his people suffer, a man who saw dreams crushed under corruption, oppression, and the suffocating grip of foreign influence. Long before he stood behind a podium or led a nation, Traoré stood for something far greater: hope. Hope that whispered through the streets of Burkina Faso like a wind before the storm, ready to rise. The rise of Ibrahim Traoré is not merely a political story. It is a deeply human journey of rising above fear, doubt, and betrayal. Born in 1988 in a country too often overlooked by global powers, he grew up witnessing the hardship of everyday people. He joined the military not out of ambition, but out of a sense of duty, to protect, to serve, and eventually, to liberate. That calling would grow louder with every injustice he saw, with every child who went to bed hungry, with every voice silenced by regimes clinging to power under the shadow of foreign interest. Traoré didn't rise through privilege or favor. He rose through fire, through battles that didn't just require guns, but courage, discipline, and clarity of vision. He believed that Africa, his Africa, did not need to be endlessly dependent, that Burkina Faso could stand proud without bending its back to old empires. But this belief wasn't popular, it wasn't safe, it wasn't welcome by those who profited from chaos. Yet he carried it like a torch through the darkest corridors of power. In September 2022, when Traoré led the coup that would place him as interim president, the world was stunned. How could such a young man take the reins of a broken nation? But those who asked that question missed the point. They failed to understand that Traoré wasn't stepping into power to rule, he was stepping up to fight for something sacred, the soul of his people. In his own words, "If the people are tired, we too are tired." We are not happy to see people dying. These are not the words of a tyrant. These are the words of a man willing to become the shield between his people and their pain. The rise of Traoré is not just about Burkina Faso. It is about every young African, every dreamer in the dark, every person told they are too young, too small, too powerless to lead change. It is a reminder that leadership doesn't come from titles. It comes from sacrifice, from the willingness to carry a nation's pain on your shoulders when everyone else chooses comfort. When he stood in front of his people for the first time, he didn't speak with arrogance. He spoke with raw conviction. He spoke as one of them, not above them. His rise is our mirror. It reflects back to us what is possible when a person refuses to be silent, when one voice becomes a movement, when the courage of a single heart can shake the foundations of global power. This is not about one man. This is about the fire that lies dormant in so many. The fire to rise, to speak, to act, and to believe that even the smallest match can light a revolution. So if you're watching this from anywhere in the world, from the streets of Ouagadougou to the alleys of Cairo, from Lagos to Nairobi, from the forgotten towns to the loud cities, remember this: your silence can be your prison or your storm. Ibrahim Traoré chose to be a storm. And from that storm, a new dawn is rising. In a world where words are carefully filtered, censored, and rehearsed for political correctness, there are rare moments when someone speaks with unchained truth. No polish, no masks, just raw fire. That moment came when Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped in front of microphones and cameras, not to beg, not to apologize, but to ignite the soul of a continent. His speech didn't come from a place of privilege or peace. It came from the battlefield of broken dreams, colonial scars, and centuries of theft hidden behind the word aid. That speech didn't just echo through Burkina Faso, it shook the entire world awake. You could hear it in his voice, the fatigue, not from weakness, but from carrying the weight of a nation that had been used, manipulated, and drained by foreign powers. He wasn't reading a script. He wasn't asking permission. He was delivering a truth so uncomfortable that Western media either tried to distort it, cut it short, or ignore it altogether. But they couldn't silence it. Because once truth is spoken with courage, it becomes a roar. In one striking moment, he asked, "Why are we poor? We have gold, we have resources, yet we are the poorest. Where does our gold go?" And there it was, the question that global empires fear. The one question that unravels the illusion of generosity and exposes the machinery of exploitation. Traoré wasn't just challenging the narrative. He was dismantling it with the precision of a soldier and the heart of a patriot. He went on, "We are told to be democratic, but who are the real dictators? The ones bombing our countries or the ones defending their people?" This wasn't just a line. It was a mirror held up to the world, a challenge to those who preach freedom while planting military bases and stealing futures under the name of stability. Ibrahim Traoré was not just defending Burkina Faso. He was giving voice to every silenced African leader, every buried revolutionary, every youth told to wait their turn while their land bled. And as he spoke, something miraculous happened. People listened. Not just in his country, but across the continent, across oceans, across generations. Because finally, someone was saying what everyone had felt in their bones for decades. That enough was enough. That Africa didn't need saving. It needed to be left to rise on its own. That the chains had been repainted to look like partnerships. That dignity could no longer be borrowed. It had to be reclaimed. Media outlets, stunned and scrambling, either labeled him dangerous or tried to downplay his words. But the people saw through it. Social media exploded. Young Africans shared his clips, posted his quotes, and drew strength from his defiance. He had become more than a president. He had become a symbol, a fire starter. And every empire, no matter how mighty, fears one thing above all, the spark of awakened people. His speech was not perfect in delivery, but it was perfect in purpose. It did not beg, it did not flatter, it was demanding, it reclaimed, and that is what made it unstoppable. He looked into the camera, not with fear, but with fire, and made it clear, Burkina Faso would no longer bow, and neither should anyone else who still believes in freedom, dignity, and the power of truth. This speech wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was about rewriting Africa's story. It was a call to the oppressed, to rise, to the silent, to speak, to the exploited, to take back what is rightfully theirs. And though the world may try to drown such voices, history has proven one truth. You cannot silence a storm. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré spoke the truth, raw, unfiltered, and born from generations of African struggle, the world didn't celebrate him. The mainstream media didn't amplify his voice. They didn't rush to highlight his vision or honor his courage. What happened instead was more telling than anything he said. The cameras blinked. The headlines vanished. The powerful media giants that claimed to defend free speech suddenly turned mute. Why? Because his words did not serve their interests. His truth threatened the very foundation of their carefully built narratives. The silence of the Western media was not accidental. It was strategic, calculated. A deliberate choice to suppress a voice that dared to expose the hypocrisy hidden behind foreign aid, diplomacy, and development. Because when Traoré stood before the world and said that Africa's wealth had been stolen for centuries, not by accident, but by design, he didn't just speak for Burkina Faso. He pulled the curtain back on an entire system of control, and that truth was too dangerous to broadcast. Ask yourself this: if a European leader had spoken with such boldness about sovereignty, about freedom from external manipulation, wouldn't it have been praised as revolutionary, as heroic? But when an African leader does it, especially a young one, unshackled by old colonial alliances, suddenly he is controversial. Suddenly he is painted as a threat to democracy. That's the double standard Traoré walked straight into and refused to back down from. Western critique followed, swift and sharp. The same outlets that stayed silent on war crimes in Africa, on puppet regimes, on illegal resource extraction, were suddenly full of opinions about how Traoré was destabilizing the region. But let's be honest, what they call stability is often just silence. The silence of oppressed people, the silence of stolen wealth, the silence of rigged elections where the results serve Western allies. Traoré shattered that silence, and for that, they labeled him dangerous. But here's the truth. Dangerous to whom? Not to the people of Burkina Faso who flooded the streets in support, not to the youth of Africa who saw in him a reflection of their own dream to rise. He was only dangerous to those who feared a free Africa, a united Africa, an Africa that no longer asks for permission to breathe. The media blackout, the twisted commentary, the selective reporting, it was all part of a bigger pattern, a system that promotes leaders who bow and demonizes those who stand. It's the same script they used against Lumumba, Sankara, Nkrumah, giants who dared to think freely and were punished for it. And now they're trying to write that same tragic story again, but this time the world is watching, and this time the people are awake. Social media broke the silence the mainstream tried to maintain. Young Africans shared Traoré's words like wildfire, adding their own voices, their own pain, their own hope. Independent channels translated his speech into dozens of languages. The message found its way through the cracks because truth cannot be buried forever. Not anymore. Not in this era of awakening. Traoré's stand reminds us that media silence is not neutral. It's a weapon used to erase heroes, to distort courage, to protect the status quo. But no amount of silence can drown a message born in fire. No amount of critique can discredit a leader who walks with his people, not above them. So to those watching this, to those who feel the weight of the world's silence, remember, when they ignore you, it's often because they fear you. When they try to discredit your voice, it's because your truth is louder than their lies. And when a man like Ibrahim Traoré rises and the world tries to look away, it only proves one thing: he's onto something powerful, and so are you. When a leader stands tall and speaks truth in a world built on lies, there are only two outcomes: either he is crushed or he is carried by the arms of his people. Ibrahim Traoré chose to rise, and when he did, the people of Burkina Faso did not hesitate. They rose with him. Not with hesitation, not with fear, but with a fire burning in their hearts, because they recognized something rare. A leader who didn't just speak for the people, he spoke as one of them. From the dusty roads of Ouagadougou to the quiet rural villages, something began to shift. The air changed. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about purpose. The people weren't rallying behind a government. They were rallying behind an idea, a vision, a fight for dignity. In a time when many nations are paralyzed by fear or resignation, Burkina Faso showed the world what happens when a nation rediscovers its soul. Traoré's speech wasn't just heard, it was felt. It was a jolt to the national heart. Suddenly, grandmothers who had lived through colonial rule spoke his name with pride. Youths who once looked for hope in foreign lands now found it within their own borders. Men and women who had lost faith in politics, in justice, in the system, now walked with their heads high. Why? Because they believed. They finally believed that change was possible and that it would not come from outside. It would be born from within. The support wasn't manufactured. It wasn't bought with slogans or orchestrated through media spin. It was real. It was raw. It was revolutionary. Flags waved not as decoration but as declarations. Songs were written, walls painted with his image, voices chanting his name like an anthem of freedom. And behind every cheer was a story. A mother who lost a son to foreign-backed conflict. A farmer whose land was stolen by multinational greed. A child who had never known what pride in one's country felt like until now. They stood with Traoré not because he was perfect, but because he was present. He wasn't hiding in palaces or flying to foreign conferences to beg for loans. He was walking the streets, listening, leading, bleeding with his people. And that is why the nation embraced him. Because finally, the mask of leadership was gone, and what remained was a man who understood the pain of his people and had the courage to carry it on his shoulders. Western analysts couldn't understand it. They saw a young man in military uniform and tried to frame him as another strongman. But they missed the truth. He didn't need to take power. It was given to him. Gifted by people who were tired of puppets, tired of being pawns, and willing to take a chance on someone who spoke from the heart and walked with the people's struggle etched into his soul. And this powerful connection between a leader and his people, is what the world fears most. Because when a nation is united not by fear, but by faith, not by oppression, but by purpose, it becomes unstoppable. No sanctions, no media blackout, no foreign pressure can kill the spirit of a nation that knows who it is and what it's fighting for. Burkina Faso is not following Ibrahim Traoré blindly. No, they are standing beside him, shoulder to shoulder, because they see in him the possibility of a future built on justice, pride, and freedom. This is not just political support. It is something far deeper. It is love. It is loyalty. It is a legacy. And now the world must understand. Burkina Faso is not just being led. It is rising. When Ibrahim Traoré speaks, his words echo far beyond Burkina Faso. They travel like thunder across a continent, long silenced by colonizers, corrupted elites, and corporate greed. But in his voice, many hear something unfamiliar: hope. Not a fragile hope built on promises, but a roaring, fearless hope carved from truth and pain. In his eyes burns not just the fire of revolution, but a vision for a new Africa. But what does that vision look like? It is not the Africa shown in charity ads, hungry, broken, helpless. This new Africa stands proud. It is not begging for aid or forgiveness. It is demanding respect. Traoré's dream is of an Africa that no longer depends on handouts from nations who built their empires on its stolen resources. An Africa that knows its worth, that takes control of its minerals, its oil, its gold, and finally uses them to feed its people, not foreign banks. He dreams of an Africa where children learn their history not from colonial textbooks, but from the truth. That Africa was once the cradle of civilization, of mathematics, science, and art. That before the chains, before the slave ships, before the borders drawn in Europe, Africa was free. And it can be again. This vision isn't about nostalgia, it's about awakening. Traoré believes that for Africa to rise, it must first remember who it is. It must break the mental chains before the economic ones. The new Africa he speaks of is mentally independent, spiritually fierce, economically fearless. It does not look to Paris, London, or Washington for answers. It looks inward. It believes in itself. And in that belief lies the revolution. He has called for unity, not the kind written on dusty pages in old political declarations, but a real, grassroots unity. A bond between nations that have long been divided by artificial borders, tribal conflicts, and foreign manipulation. He knows that a divided Africa is a weak Africa. But a united Africa? It would be the most powerful force on Earth. The vision includes trade that stays on the continent, technology built by African minds for African needs, defense systems that protect the people, not oppress them, leaders who serve, not rule. This is not a fantasy, it's a necessity, because the old way has failed. The imported models, the Western ideologies, they've only deepened Africa's wounds. Now, Traoré is saying it's time to build our own model, one based on justice, in truth, on self-reliance, and perhaps most powerfully, on youth. Traoré, being one of the youngest presidents in the world, understands the energy that flows through Africa's streets. The youth are no longer content with waiting. They are done with broken promises. They are tired of being told they are the future while being robbed in the present. This vision of a new Africa puts them at the center, not just as workers, but as builders, thinkers, warriors, and creators. Of course, this vision terrifies the old world, because a new Africa would mean the collapse of an exploitative system that has enriched others for centuries. It would mean the end of cheap labor, stolen resources, and silent suffering. That's why the resistance is fierce. That's why the media remains quiet. That's why the criticism is loud and swift. But the dream is louder, the fire is hotter. And now, more and more Africans are beginning to believe, maybe this is our time. This vision, born from the streets of Burkina Faso, is no longer just Traoré's. It's spreading, from Mali to Niger, from Congo to Ghana, from the townships of South Africa to the slums of Nairobi. A spark has been lit, and no one, no empire, no media, no army can put it out. When a small nation stands tall, the world doesn't just watch, it shifts. Ibrahim Traoré may lead Burkina Faso, but the tremors of his actions are now shaking the pillars of global power. Make no mistake, what is unfolding is not just a local revolution. It is a direct challenge to the very system that has kept the global South chained for centuries. And the world knows it. This is why Traoré's message has caused such discomfort in Western capitals. Not because of his age, not because of his uniform, but because his courage threatens to unravel a global game that has been rigged for far too long. You see, the modern world was not built on equality. It was built on exploitation. For decades, centuries even, the wealth of Western nations has depended on the extraction of African riches, gold, oil, cobalt, diamonds, and even people. And in return, Africa was given poverty, loans with poison clauses, and leaders hand-picked to obey foreign interests. Now imagine what happens if that system breaks. Imagine if more African nations rise up and take control of their resources. Imagine if they stop exporting raw materials for pennies and start producing, refining, and trading on their own terms. Imagine if Africa stops playing the victim and starts acting as the giant it truly is, young, resource-rich, and ready to lead. This is the nightmare that Traoré represents to the old order, because his leadership is not just about internal policy. It is a symbol, a signal, a spark. If Burkina Faso succeeds in charting its own independent course, others will follow. And when enough nations rise, the entire economic balance of the world will shift. This is not theory. We are already seeing it. Countries like Mali and Niger have echoed his sentiments. Pan-Africanism, once a dream whispered by visionaries like Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara, is now being shouted in the streets. There are movements calling for regional currency, African defense alliances, and the expulsion of exploitative foreign military bases. The West may call it rebellion, but to Africa, it feels like resurrection. And the ripples extend even further. Across Latin America, Asia, and even the Middle East, there are oppressed peoples watching Traoré, learning from him. He has reignited a global conversation about sovereignty, about dignity, about the right of nations to define their own destiny. Suddenly, leaders who have bowed in fear are considering standing in defiance. Because when one man breaks the illusion of Western invincibility, he gives millions the courage to question it. Of course, the backlash is fierce. There will be economic threats, sanctions, propaganda campaigns, efforts to divide and destabilize. But history has shown, when an idea's time has come, no empire can stop it. The truth that Traoré is revealing, the truth that the world's wealth is built on Africa's wounds, can no longer be hidden. The global implications are clear. The age of silent suffering is over. A new era is being born, one where the exploited are no longer ashamed, but awakened. One where the narrative no longer belongs to colonial historians and biased journalists, but to the people on the ground, rising with purpose and power. Ibrahim Traoré's speech was not a ripple in a pond. It was a stone hurled at the glass walls of global injustice, and the cracks are spreading. The question is no longer whether the world will change. It's how fast and how far. The world must prepare for a future where Africa no longer whispers in the corner, but speaks boldly at the center. A future where nations like Burkina Faso do not ask for permission to rise. They simply do. Because once a people find their voice, once they believe in their strength, there is no force on earth that can silence them again. And there you have it. A voice that cannot be silenced. A truth that can no longer be buried. Ibrahim Traoré's speech was not just a national address. It was a historic roar from the heart of Africa to the rest of the world. While the media turns a blind eye, while critics call it dangerous, millions are finally waking up. Because what Traoré said was more than politics. It was permission for every oppressed nation to rise, to reclaim, and to rebuild. This is not just Burkina Faso's fight. This is a continental awakening, a global shift, a movement that cannot be stopped. So now we ask you, will you stay silent, or will you rise with this fire? Like, share, comment. Let the world hear what the media won't say. Let Traoré's voice echo through every street, every village, every soul hungry for freedom.